good morning, good afternoon, good evening to those of you around the world joining in for our 3 Steps Towards AI-Enhanced Audit by 2020 webinar. I'm JC, or John Coulthard, and I run our product management group as well as our audit and assurance business over here at MindBridge. I've spent a lot of time working with corporate finance. I know all the trials and tribulations that you go through as auditors trying to get information, and you as practitioners in business, what you go through on interesting insights today for you around how to get AI ready and be AI enabled between now and the end of the year. So the biggest part of the agenda is just really talking about artificial intelligence and how it's transforming the space. 2, obviously talking a little bit about the offering that we have here at MindBridge called AI Auditor. And finally, really the most important part, and where we'll spend the bulk of the time, around the roadmap towards artificial intelligence and being an AI enabled firm. When we look out into the landscape today, we have to start realizing where we are in the world landscape as it relates to the challenges brought to us for audit and accounting. Probably the most significant one, and it's significant not just for accountants, not just for chartered accountants, CPAs, and others around the world, but for really any business professional, is the data explosion. We've spent an awful lot of time over the last few years getting organized for this data, but even with that, most firms are still struggling to keep up with the pace and veracity of data that's coming into their organization. We create so much more data today, and we will create so much more data this year than we have in any other year that we've been around. So you can imagine the types of insights that potentially go missing as it relates to even financial data, because there's that much more information to put context around what you're looking at and what you're seeing. One of the biggest things that we obviously have to look at as well is what's troubling the system. Well, what's troubling the system today is there's lots of marquee cases and news items relating to public company audits, but there's a lot less going on around private company audits or non-public companies and when they get themselves into trouble. What we do know is the Association for Certified Fraud Examiners estimates that we are well past 100 billion of known losses per year. What they also estimate, unfortunately, is that the actual financial loss could be as much as 4 trillion or greater based on human intent or error. And this comes to us from the report to nations from the ACFE's most recent guide. And it's really troubling to think that this type of number, 4 trillion, could be what we think is going on. But we don't really into a challenge where artificial intelligence, as it's been used as a term, as a hot buzzword for the last 3-4 years, is going to solve this. Well, it will solve this, but it takes a partnership of professionals and technology to really make a strong impact in the world's market space. Over here at MindBridge, we spend a lot of time thinking about the best way to present audit data analytics or advanced insights based on the data that we already do know. Every organization around the world is managing their data footprint from a financials perspective in some pretty basic ways. Most companies subscribe to a double-entry bookkeeping system. They may, if they're really small, still only be using Excel, but more than likely they've graduated to some type of electronic format, some type of enterprise resource planning product. Again, might be something like our friends offer over at Xero or Intuit with QuickBooks or Sage, and it could, or you could be an enterprise client that's been on this enterprise resource planning tools like SAP, Oracle, etc. for years and years and years. Either way, this data is really hard to get at. It's really hard to visualize, and it's hard to understand if you're going to make if you're going to find a material misstatement. And part of that, it goes back to that data issue, which is we're exploding the amount of data we capture as we go through these years of gathering data, and we need a way to actually get through it. So MindBridge decided to roll out a solution called AI Auditor, which is really designed to be built from the ground up to identify risks for you, to be able to find all of the little nuggets of goodness in the information by rebuilding all of those financial statements and all of the views of the data based on all the entries that are happening in a business. So analyzing 100% of all of this data and artificial intelligence techniques like machine learning, other AI capacities like natural language understanding, neural nets, all these types of buzzwords that you hear to really drive you into understanding a little bit more of what's out there, and with the end goal being redefining what we say is reasonable assurance. How do we know inside an organization or as an auditor to an organization that we are reasonably sure that there aren't material misstatements? Well, we're redefining that because the old school ways of using traditional computer-assisted audit tools and techniques were really around rules or I don't want to say primitive statistical modeling, but just basic statistical modeling and predictive modeling tools. Building these frameworks was mostly around things that we knew. If we go all the way back to 2002 and the Sarbanes-Oxley Act and think about all the playbooks that we just gave any fraudster around what we're looking for in audit engagements, you know, we need to grow up past that. We need to be able to do things in a more dynamic way and really uncover those insightful things. So artificial intelligence and machine learning and the pieces that go into an AI-built system are really going to help us get there, because it can go down into the most granular piece of information, an entry that is part of a transaction, that's part of the bookkeeping process, and understand whether it's an outlier, understand if it's got a strange flow of information, there's an odd signatory or user that's posting that type of transaction, and having the ability to look at this in almost a 360 view very, very cleanly. And the way we do that is we actually build upon the goodness of computer-assisted audit tools. We actually take all of those types of expert rules and concepts that we've learned over the last, N number of decades of auditing, whether it be looking for things that end in strange numbers like zeros and nines, looking for those manual entries and carving them out and understanding what they are, and making sure that we understand the manual entries, and making sure that we understand statistical models like Benford's Law. Are there any numbers in here that look to be that they could have been manufactured? We do all that goodness, and we bring on top of that all these pieces around machine learning, being able to look at both supervised learning, unsupervised learning, and reinforcement learning even closer into what are the potentially problematic entries and transactions. And when you link all of that together, you have the ability to actually create an ensemble AI, an ensemble of all these techniques. And our goal is to make this in an explainable way. Again, we're going to spend the vast majority of our time working through how do you get AI enabled and how do you get AI ready. But first, let's just talk a little bit about some of the things that just happen automatically when you become AI enabled. So a lot of the hard work that the team over here at MindBridge has done is to make sure that we can deliver you value near instantaneously and really get you further and further into data analytics as part of your program, whether that be a continuous internal audit program, whether that be an external engagement where you're the external auditor to those firms, but really deliver you much higher degrees of value over time. Having the ability to, again, data, be able to see the trend lines and the various sparked outliers that just may be a little bit different, being able to dig into the weeds and find out which account groupings are more problematic or have more potential associated risk. And finally, coming to the ability to actually communicate clearly, this particular transaction might have triggered a given event, let's call it this expert score on one of our machine learning algorithms, and try to give you context by which it's done that. And all of that through a way that you can actually interact natively with the data that you are so clearly wanting to get into. So let's actually take a second and pop over to a view of some data. So as we started the webinar, I loaded some data, and in this data set, it's going to show me some results. Now, all of this, again, is powered by a combination of things. We call them control points. These are basic rules. These are more advanced statistical models and machine learning models. And throughout these, it gives us a picture of where we are for this business that has $13 million of financial flow through the accounts. I've got some medium risk transactions and some low risk transactions. I can dig in by time period and really get to some of these things. So I can actually just point and click and get the answers I'm looking for very, very quickly. and I can understand where the risk is in my business. So I can see as I radiate out in assets, which is relatively healthy based on the nice shading of green here, there's nothing really that sparks me as something I need to investigate significantly. When I look over at expenses, there's some things that are becoming this kind of awful lime green, which tells me, oh, they're not quite at the moderate risk yet, but they're getting close. And as you can see, equity's got a bit of challenges. We should probably send our accounts payable also trending towards that, higher degree of risk in all the entries and transactions that impacted those accounts. So a lot of what you're looking at is a piece of the puzzle, which is data literacy and understanding the concepts of AI, and we'll get to that a little bit later in the presentation and in the webinar, but really it's about how quickly you can then access and get into the data, how quickly you can go through and see how the data is trending over time, where you can pick out given years or pieces of data, be able to look at core business ratios and understand very, very quickly, for instance, in this case, payables as a percentage of cash disbursement. I can see what the natural flow of my business is. That sort of shaded blue area tells me what the system thinks it should be. I can very quickly say, well, what should it have been for that year that I'm auditing against? Compare that 2017 line with my forecast line, and not only am I seeing that we're underperforming in our first sort of 5 or 6 months, I also have 2 significant outliers in the periods in May and the periods of February that are not consistent with the general flow of my business. So that tells me a lot. And remember, the whole idea of being AI enabled is understanding what that data is telling me. So sometimes I want to point and click and go drive and go deeply in there. I just want to ask the system some simple questions. I want to ask the system to tell me, if there are any risky transactions, and within that risky transaction set, maybe I want to know whether they're over a certain amount, and maybe I want to know if experts agree that they are risky, and experts think are at risk. And I can just ask a question like this. And the good news is nothing is high risk. That risky set where it's over. So maybe I want to say, you know what, let me just look at all the transactions. So I can either real time just get rid of qualifiers that I don't want to see, and I can ask that question again and come back with a filtered list. So from thousands or potentially hundreds of thousands of transactions, I can trim this down into a manageable amount of information. Inside that, I can then look at any one of these and identify what's going on in these transactions and try to assess if there's a problem. So a lot of what happens when people start looking at technology is they get overwhelmed by information. One of the things you can look at as you start getting ready, as you start thinking about this first step of the journey is really getting an understanding of what technology and capabilities can support you with. The first part is just literacy. It's understanding and it's awareness. So in a solution that you're thinking about, or you're thinking about going down this AI path, understanding the capabilities and aligning that to what you're doing is a very big part of being successful. And in this example, I can very quickly, as I showed you, see what potentially is risky. I can go in and ask questions. I can see where it might be risky. I can go in and ask questions. I can see individual entries, and within those entries and those transactions, see which individual tags or control points were triggered. So in this particular case, that first line, or sorry, the second line that I've highlighted, my bank account, the things that have triggered on that entry are things like it was posted on a weekend, the system is set as part of my material threshold, it's in my top 2% of the ledger values from a monetary perspective, and it's hitting a cash or cash equivalent. Like, these are some basic things that you could probably do in Excel, and we'll talk about Excel in a little bit because it's really important to your jobs. But really what we want to look at is some of these more advanced statistical or machine learning algorithms and really understand what they're telling me. So again, this is about bringing more information to the forefront for you as professionals to take better judgment and better action. How do you become enabled? You start learning about what some of these things mean. In the international audit standards, there's typically a statement in every single one I've seen as it gets then populated down into the countries and the various rollouts by the professional engagement guides at the various country level. They're always looking for unusual or outliers or rarity. Well, machine learning is a great way to get there, because what it can do is it can actually identify individual entries or individual transactions more unusual than anything else. I always kind of talk about, I grew up in a small town. Go to my main street farmers market and ask, out of the 1,200 people that live in the town, 100 of them are in the farmers market every weekend, and I go and ask if everyone knows Tom. Well, if 98 people know Tom and 2 people don't know Tom, those 2 people are the outliers. They're the unusual things. If it's the inverse, clearly no one knows Tom, but 2 people do. You know 2 things. One is Tom's the outlier, so that transaction is weird because it doesn't know anything about these other 98 transactions. So that's the type of thing that we do in machine learning, and that's what machine learning in its general construct is supposed to do. It's to help you identify these strange patterns in the data or in the information set so that you can really hone in on what's interesting, what's valuable to you as the auditor. So you can very quickly see with tooling and with technology how we can start augmenting you, how we can bring the knowledge of machine learning and statistical models and the basic rules together to create an ensemble AI and deliver a lot more value to you. But we still haven't really hit the pinnacle. How do we get from point A to point B? Well, one of the ways we get from point A to point B is start to have the conversation around what's the journey going to look like. And for every single organization, the journey will take slight deviations. But generally speaking, you have to start creating buckets that are going to be meaningful to you. This is a set that we typically use when conversing with potential prospects and clients around how they're going to get to the evolution stage. Because this isn't a revolution. Doing data analytics and doing more advanced things in our business has always been an evolution. It's been that way since I started in industry almost 2 decades ago, and it's been that way for the 20 to 30 to 50 years before me. It's an evolution. It's not a revolution. But what's evolutionary for you is going to be slightly different than potentially your peer firm across the street or a competitor across the street, right? It's going to be a little bit different. But generally, the construct of what we're saying here is a journey can go through a multitude of phases to be super effective, to get to that state of involvement, to get to the point where everyone in the firm, whether you're part of an audit team, whether you're part of an audit committee, whether you're part of the controllers group, everyone in the firm can really evolve and leverage these types of artificial intelligence techniques to better their judgment, to make sure that they're moving the ball forward every single day based on data combined with judgment. So how do you start? Well, you start with exploring, understanding. And I'm going to go into 3 steps of how you start this in a second, but that's part of phase 1. Part of phase 1 is always exploratory and engagement, getting your team engaged, getting yourself engaged, and learning. And underneath this, there's an undertow of things that have to happen. Identifying change management for you and your team and your group, making sure that you layer in training and support as you go through these evolutionary phases of from explore into enable and expand. And then from enable to expand, making sure that you deliver a level of competency across and capacity so that you can actually embed this into your whole firm, and to get to the final state where you're actually thinking about how am I going to change my business, how am I going to change anything about me, and how I'm viewed externally. And that's when you get to that point of evolvement. Now, why would you partner with us to get there? There's a number of things. Artificial intelligence research tells you every day there's sort of 3 different flavors of artificial intelligence. There's companies that are designing themselves around really skilled resources and consultancies. There's companies that have big monolithic platforms that are designed to solve any problem. And then there's vertical companies that are very laser focused on solving a problem. We're in that last camp. So why would you choose to work with us, work with MindBridge and AI Auditor? The artificial intelligence has been honed for the last 3.5 years. It's real, it's there, and it works to identify those things that are potentially more risky, that are potentially more concerning to things like reasonable assurance or material misstatement. We combine all of the things that you're used to in some of those traditional computer-assisted audit, other AI elements, including machine learning. It's about getting you to really get a product in your hands that works, that can be turned on in a matter of minutes, and that embraces all of these ideas in moving you forward. So it's kind of right here, it's right now, it's real, and it can be in your hands. That's one element. The other element is that we also want to start creating with you a roadmap to your success, a roadmap towards you being an AI-enabled firm. And a lot of that comes down to taking that first slice of involvement, the enable, the engage and explore, and really breaking that apart and really going a little bit faster. Now, before I go too much further, I'll pause for a second, remind everyone, this is a webinar. There is the question applet or window. Please start filling in the questions. We will have time for lots in as you get there. If you can't find the question one, find the chat one and put it in. So back on track. We want to help you build a roadmap towards AI. And I like breaking things into manageable pieces. So we decided to talk about this in terms of the 3 sort of core fundamental steps of getting you from here today, which you're actually already in step 1, by the way, to the point where you're actually using and working with AI. So why do I say that? Why are you in step 1? Well, the roadmap to AI doesn't need to be long. Another fallacy in the marketplace is that AI is going to cost you millions of dollars. It's going to take you multiple quarters, if not years, to get to one state of goodness. And then you're going to have to continually reinvest to get to the next state of goodness and the next state of goodness. And while that's true, technology does take those journeys. Again, you can work with teams that have vertical, in our case, for finance, accountancy, and audit, and advisory, and you can use it today, and you can go forward. So how do we get you there in 6 to 8 weeks to get going, either in each of these steps or for all 3 steps? Well, it starts with just understanding how AI could impact your practice. What are the things you need to know? What is the research that you should probably do? What are those types of elements? Right? Step 2, it's all around now let's plan, in this case, for an AI-based audit. Or how is my team, right? If I'm the chief audit exec or if I'm the partner in charge of that external audit for a firm, how am I going to do this differently this year versus any other time I've done it? And finally, one of the biggest value adds that we bring to the table, and you should be looking for, is about refining that with expert guidance. Regardless of the type of firm you are, regardless of how you operate today, at the end of the day, one of the single biggest things that's important for you is your brand and the fact that you know what's been transpiring in your business and how you get there. So we have on staff chartered accountants and certified public accountants from various jurisdictions to help you get over that last little hump. How is it going to impact you? How are we going to communicate internally within an audit team, within an executive team, and how are we going to communicate to our client or stakeholder, depending on which side of the aisle you're on? So those are our 3 steps, and we can really quite easily get through these steps together in very short amounts of time. We've seen clients go from early stages of trying to learn about us to jumpstart to execution in 5 weeks. We've seen it take longer, we've seen it take less. It really depends on your appetite to move forward. So what are the things that we think about in that step 1, validating AI for your practice? Well, I think there's 3 components that is sort of unique, which is a Jumpstart program. So we designed AI Auditor Jumpstart to be around helping firms understand the application of AI as it relates to their function in audit or advisory. So we packaged a series of learnings and other things, which I'll talk more about in a second. The second piece is we help build up your data literacy, both through training and education, but this is something you should also be doing on your own. understanding, who in the firm has the data literacy that you want, and understand either what your clients are giving you or what your stakeholders are giving you or what the stakeholders are looking for outcomes, and be able to actually work with that information. And a critical point in any change that's evolutionary is finding the champion. Finding that person or team of people who are going to take us from early stages step 1 through to late stages 4 to the point where you get to that evolved state. So identifying that person is really quite critical. So let's talk a little bit about the Jumpstart program and why we're so keen to get people going as quickly as possible. Well, the first and foremost is a lot of folks are really still grappling with the issue of A, data, B, what is AI going to do for me? C, how do I even get started? So we tried to design a program where in each of our course material, you're kind of going through those stages. You're going through very high level concept, artificial intelligence. I hear this buzzword every day, every week. We've got chief scientists from organizations like Baidu saying electricity is going to be the next, just like electricity was, an evolutionary and revolutionary point in our time, AI is going to be that today. That's Andrew Ng from Baidu. But a lot of people don't realize that AI has actually been around as a term since a series of academic papers were written and thought about and then met on in as early as 1956 over at Dartmouth College at one of the symposiums, and actually was attempted multiple times between the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and now into the 2000s. And what's different and interesting about the heritage of artificial intelligence is it's also grown. Early stages artificial intelligence is what commonplace. It was all around natural language processing and natural language understanding. It was designed around the idea that humans communicate in very different ways, and that it could be based on living in Rochester, New York versus living in San Francisco. It could be based on whole dialects and differences as it relates to languages. So Portuguese, English, Chinese, Japanese, whatever languages people are speaking, all the way through to actually just understanding what's good and bad is a very, behavioral assessment point of view based on all sorts of nurture and that could be anywhere in the world. So artificial intelligence started on this natural language point, but it's much, much bigger than that today. We're actually extending artificial intelligence systems. And if you look at Joe Marks, anytime he's spoken, he's from Carnegie Mellon University. He's the lead of their AI and innovation programs over there. And if you ever listen to him speak, or if you ever get a chance to, it's a really great opportunity, but he will tell you that AI is not a singular. There's not one single thing that makes an AI system. There's actually multitude. And it could be the natural language processing where it all started, but it could equally be machine learning. It could equally be predictive analytics. So how do we cope with that? So part of the Jumpstart program is to get you the educational background and footing so that people get going and they can really understand and describe what it is and translate that into what it could mean for you. In addition to that, one of the things that people are always asking us is, hey, you're looking at every single transaction, you're going to find fraud, right? The reality is we will have a much higher degree chance of surfacing something interesting that could lead you to find an intentional defrauding of a company versus just using haphazard sampling. That is, we can show you the math, we can show you the stats, but how do you actually figure that out? How do you understand how you get there? Well, we give you a bunch of hands-on case studies. And the leader who's been working on this, has been working on this with leading universities around the globe to continue to enhance the case study, to make it real, to actually put it in your hands and let you actually look at data, try to find it and spot it for yourself, be it in Excel or another viewpoint that you want to use, plus using something like AI Auditor to actually refine what that looks like. And finally, we want to get going, right? A lot of the problems with artificial intelligence, because everyone's nervous it's going to take multiple quarters or years, people don't want to just get going. If you have an engagement coming up in the next 30 to 60 days, you could be up and running and asking your client for data inside of an hour. You could then use that data to better plan, better understand the potential risks, and actually go through as far as even selecting samples based on a risk-adjusted process. And I'll kind of go through a little bit of that as we go through. Because at the end of the day, the only way to really empower and enact is to act. So that's a little bit about part of step one, right? This idea of validating how AI is going to work. Start working with our Jumpstart program. Number two, as you do that in parallel, is also start being ready from a data literacy perspective. So I very, very quickly show how AI Auditor can provide you lots of different insights. And I'm going to go back to it here in a second. And I'm going to just touch on things like the trending analysis. I'm going to touch on things like the risk view. But the reality is what you end up having to look at today is maybe a little light in terms of total data that you need to look at in the future to be super effective. And so it means building a lot of your data literacy and making sure that you can understand some of these concepts. So let's start with the outcome that everyone's looking for, and we'll look at that in product, and then we're going to go to Excel and actually talk about data literacy in its general terms. So when we look at data and when we think about what has to happen for great analysis and for us to understand what's going on in a business, we've typically looked at trial balances, we've looked at financial statements, maybe year over year types of views, but rarely have we ever looked at a system that's actually going to assemble the data for you and actually give you all of that data in an aggregated viewpoint. Now, there's lots of corporations out there that internally, whether it be from the CFO's office or some other operational point, has built business intelligence tools and rolled out all sorts of performance management tools. But very, very rarely are they actually taking every single entry, interrogating it, and in this case, across 28 different views or control points, and assembling you a view in a holistic fashion. Very rare has anyone built anything like this. And in fact, I think we're probably the world's first as it relates to being a platform that's looking at it that way and enabling AI on top of it to really enhance your ability. But what do I mean about the data literacy? So first and foremost, we've got to understand the raw content, right? And we've got to understand what some of those outputs are. So a lot of firms are looking for the ability to see data over time. This is a great way to indicate how the business is doing. And you might want to look at that through a lens of the balance sheet or the income statement. You might want to look at that in given other areas. So in my income statement, my revenue seems to be trending along very well and then obviously skyrockets up. But maybe I need to look at my expenses. And oh, that's a kind of an interesting dip at the end of the year. These are all things that I might want to do, right? If I look at my cumulative year to date, obviously it's going to be going up, but then obviously I'm flushing out those accounts at the end of the year, right? But I need to be able to see how these things and how these trends apply. The only way to do that is to look at multiple years of data and get that from your clients if you're an external auditor or advisor. And sometimes that's really challenging. The things that we've done and built in place is the ability to have you actually just ask the questions, again, to try to support yourselves. So I've got a customer who might be on a system like Epicor, I'm going to just type in, how do I look for Epicor data? And the system came back and said, well, here's a how-to on actually getting an export ready from a GL data. How do I actually do data import? So it's learned a little bit about my question, and it's very quickly going to say, well, here's how you do it. Here's the steps. So there's 5 really quick and simple steps to go into Epicor as an example ERP system and actually ask for data, which then can then run for the number of years that I want to. You get to 5 years and 5 years plus, you get some really interesting things happen. So again, a lot of this is around building that understanding, building that literacy around what would be good for me to do. Many of you, if you've gone through for finance and accounting in school or your BCom and you've done your CA or your chartered accountancy designation or your CPA designation, you understand management accounting ratios and key performance indicators. But are you currently capable of actually looking at, and I very quickly went through this earlier on in the webinar, are you able to actually understand how to predict out what should have happened? Are you able to see the trend lines that's going on in the business at a deeper rooted level? And the answer is, it's really hard, right? If you use a predictive analytics tool, there's many of them out on the market, some are easier to use than others. You'd have to build a model, and then based on that model, you'd have to incorporate all the key core factors, and you'd spend a lot of time building that model, then rolling out that model, and then getting the data, and then doing all these things. Well, maybe what you need to be thinking about is, well, just what is the data? And then is there a tool that automatically does some of these things for me? And this is one of those tools, right? It's an ability for you to actually look at all this data over time, understand the flow, and be able to identify outliers in seconds. And we'll talk about, that whole data loading and how we can streamline that whole process for you as a business. But a lot of the data literacy and a lot of why you want to get there is these types of outcomes. You equally want to have a series of reports available to you that are built from the bottom up to compare against whatever tool that is that your client to build their P&L or their balance sheet or any of those KPI scoring. So what you have here is a way to very quickly test, validate that the data is correct, that what they've given you is whole, just by doing simple things like looking at the income statement and balance sheet that's created here, by going and looking at trial balance to general ledger check, right? And looking to see if anything, happens to be unbalanced. All of these are available to you very, very quickly and easily, just by clicking the download, opening up Excel, and comparing against whatever your client's given you. And then, as I said, it's all about then understanding the data that you've got or the data that you want to ask for. So typically, we want to ask for data that has a lot of information, including user ID and all sorts of those things, because part of your job is to understand the controls profile. Part of our jobs is to identify where we think those controls may have been, not followed, or at least identify potential riskier things. So when you can understand the type and size of data that you can actually ask clients for, and they're willing to give you because you can frame it in the right way, you're going to be able to do these types of very quick analytics and be able to get to the heart of it, which is a risk overview, and find out where you need to focus more time and energy as you go through your investigative substantive process of going out and visiting with the client. So at the end of the day, you kind of have to get there through understanding the data, and you have to understand what to ask for. And as I said, I'm going to just pop back here to the slide. Part of that starts with the data, the raw information that you're getting. Now, I would love to tell you today that there's a utopia place in mind where we can take any PDF file of any kind of constraint and load it into the system. The reality is we can load many, but it's not really the most optimal way for your client or your... So normally you'd say, okay, well, give me, a data dump, a flat file or an Excel file of that data. And typically it would come out in a couple of different ways, structured or unstructured, grouped or ungrouped, and it would have different levels of information. So to give you an example of what a group file kind of looks like, I'm going to pop into our good friend Microsoft Excel for a second and kind of show you what that might look like. So I've got this data set. It's come from one of my clients. I can see that it's MindBridge Plumbing Limited. Clearly that's a great company and you should definitely be investing in it. All kidding aside, I can see that it's a data dump from June of 2013 to May of 2015, and I've sorted it by transaction number. Okay, interesting. I can see that I've got what appears to be an account number and account description, and then as it states, I've got my transactions, ordered, from the transaction number in my sorting. I can see kind of some comment data. I can see whether it's debit and credit. I can see the various balances. I can see all of these interesting things. And I'd be thinking to myself, if I was getting this file from one of my clients, I'd be thinking, man, I wanted to look at, journal entry 1648. How do I do that, right? I'm probably going to go in and I'm going to do a quick search for it. Let me see, is there anything that has, journal 1468? Okay, yep, there it is. Oh, I can see that it's restocked. I can see the date it was transpired, and I can see that it was a debit entry. I don't really know what account. So let me just see here. I'm going to go back up for a second. Okay, it was in a fittings account. Starts with 1, so that's probably going to be in my assets classification. Okay, I'm getting a little bit closer and closer. The reason I'm bringing this type of Excel file up is this is very, very common, right? It's very common to get ERP dumps that are, transaction by account reports or backups of the data. And what's hard for a lot of folks is how do I make this useful, right? And so sometimes this isn't really about how to understand it, but whether the system can handle it as much as anything. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this data file, and rather than me keep trying to figure it out in Excel, we're just going to let AI Auditor go take a look at it. So we're going to just happen to go back into the application. We're going to go in, and I'm going to go through and I'm going to create a new engagement for this year. And I'm going to call it, my 2015 year-end results. And, I might give it a bit of information. This might be very helpful as it relates to how I'm going to deal with this system. Okay, I think it's going to be Sage 50 that they sent me. We're going to validate that in a second. I'm going to add people to it if I want to. What am I looking at? I'm going to do full year ledger. And I'm going to very quickly go and drag and drop that data file in. So instead of dragging it, I'm actually going to browse just so that you can see me go grab it. We're going to go up one folder here. And we're going to grab that account report. And we're going to bring it into the system. So here it is here. You can see I had it open. So files getting uploaded, finalizing some information for me. I think this is Sage 50 ledger. Oh, good thing I selected that. But the system actually can figure these things out. That's pretty radical, new. It's going to go and do a little bit of work here, and it's going to say, okay, well, based on all the data that you gave me, it was a group format. In fact, I already knew exactly what to do with it. You confirmed, yes, it was Sage 50, and I already knew the footprint of Sage 50, so I don't have to map anything. That's awesome. It already has things like transaction ID well identified. It doesn't need me to do any more work. Awesome. All I have to do now is say, let's go, let's import it. And so I'm going to import that data set, and it's going to tell me that everything else looks good. Do I have any codes or anything I want it to do? Oh, there's a couple of warnings here. Maybe I need to go through that. I've got some accounts that I've never seen before. So it's going to go on and done that. It's telling me that, oh, that bank account number, I think it should go into my assets domestic bank. I might say, yeah, that's exactly where it should go. So I'm going to do all of that work very, very quickly. I'm going to go ahead and just double check. Oh, we've got some reporting data issues. They may not be all that relevant, but I'm going to go ahead and just say ignore for now, and I'm going to go kick off that analysis. That gets me to the point. So all I've done is I've said, I've got this data file. It's going to know exactly what to do with it. It's going to go and run my data for me. So understanding the data that you potentially need, understanding the data that you potentially want to use is going to be critical to understand how we get there. So step one, simply put, you can jump on our Jumpstart program and learn a lot about this, but the biggest thing is make sure that you start spending some time identifying, the champion and making sure that you've got a data literacy, because those two things combined are really going to make a huge impact in getting you towards an AI-enabled firm. Step two, next big step, informing your clients and in preparing. Probably know what I mean in both these cases, but let's go into it in a little bit more detail. At the end of the day, based on the data that artificial intelligence can process and a system like AI Auditor can process, you're probably going to be asking for a little bit more data than your client's used to, all in one shot, a lot earlier in the cycle. So how do you inform the client about that? How do you show them the value in doing this and why it's going to reduce the time on their side long term as you engage with them? Similarly, you want to prepare your staff. You want to start getting into a model of understanding how this is going to change how they do their work effort. So when you think about informing the client, there's a bunch of different pieces. And again, partnering with us, we can help you through any one of these. But clearly, the biggest thing is that you're going to be engaging with your clients on a radical new way to radical. It's just something you've never done before. The great news is this can be used with your professional judgment with all the existing standards in place. There's very little delta between using Excel versus using an AI tool, except for the fact that you're going to get better insights, you're going to de-risk that process, and you're going to be able to, over time, really start creating a high degree of efficiency because it can sort through that data, it can figure out what's wrong, you can go and investigate quick data, and you can create a more friction-free audit program with your client. So the first step is, start talking to your clients about the fact that you're going to use this type of technology. It's going to be a win for continuance letters or upcoming proposals because they're going to see you as a thought leader in your space. When you talk to and look at AI CPAs, for example, at last year's Engage, I forget how many percentage, but it was a fairly low percentage of companies that had actually started to use AI. When we met with AI CPA at the exec roundtable in January of 2019, it was probably a little bit higher, but still people were sitting on the fence. So you could be seen as a propelling yourselves very, very nicely. The reality is this is you're going to ask for data in a slightly different way. Use the guidance that whoever your partner is, let's hope and assume that it's us at MindBridge, have us help you tell them exactly what to do. And it's going to be a lot more it's going to reduce a lot of the friction that you currently have in asking for the data. It's literally that Epicor one that you saw, 5 quick steps to export data in a way that you can then get 5, 10 years worth of history and provide more value. They're going to say, well, why are you asking for that many more years? Well, we can work on just what you're normally doing, which is a single year of data, but really to get amazing insights, you get past the 4th year into the 5th year, so the current year plus 4 more historical years, you're going to find that the data will respond much more effectively in pretty much any system. Data is the thing that drives artificial intelligence. You'll hear Chairwoman of IBM talk about data is the new oil. Same thing in this type of example. The more data you feed a system, the better off it's going to come to. So let's start with talking and informing your client. Let's start working with the team. A lot of the challenges that you end up with is balancing the right amount of work effort when and where. So maybe start thinking about implementing a process to get that data early for historical years and maybe to a certain point in time. Think about it like an intern, right? Where you might get 9 months of the current year, get 4 years of the historical, and we're going to start plotting out where we think that data should be. And it's going to allow you to do a lot of things in your planning process and validate your planning process so that you can get to the point where you're reducing the overall effort for the total team. And some of that comes down to things like, making sure that you can build a library of either industry-specific ratios, filters, standard procedures right in the tool. So the minute you load construction versus manufacturing versus healthcare, whatever it might be, you can actually bundle all those things together. And based on all of that, once you've assessed the risk, once you've identified what type of sample selection you're likely going to need, you're going to be able to do that very quickly, just launching the intelligent sampler based on one of those filters, and very quickly get a risk stratified sample, which is, kind of the leading benchmark for what folks like the AI CPA are looking for, risk adjusted sample selections. We do all that in one product, in one set of features. But this is about making sure your staff see this and start building this into your continuous training that you're likely going to do for CPE in the fall time period, right? Get them on the train today. Why wait? And finally, step 3, how are we going to integrate now AI into your practice? Well, it comes back to a lot of step 1 and step 2 being done, but step 3 is all around now transitioning from it being an idea, from getting started quickly, to actually rolling this out to the rest of the team and into the practice. So what we do on our side to help you and support you with that is we continue on the education of technical readiness and discovery around which engagements, what their ERPs are there any gotchas, how can we help you smooth that client relationship in asking for data, in getting the right data, and getting the data early. And early enough in the process so that you're not showing up to do the field work and you're 2 days late on getting data, right? Having us help you, having chartered accountants working with you, helping understand your current leadership model, your current change model, and allowing us to help support you and augment that. And leveraging our advocacy team to really advocate for you internally within your firm and internally within the vendor, and make sure that we create a nice, easy glide path. So step 3 is actually, you're already doing this. So you're not even now AI, getting ready to be AI ready for 2020. You're actually doing it, and you'll be doing it in a short number of weeks. And why do we do this? And why would you do this? I mean, it really comes down to a lot of things that you can now start thinking about. Earlier identification of risk. Whether you do interim field work or not, getting that data early helps augment and support your planning process. As you finish the planning process and as you start critically, you'll have the opportunity to really identify areas that might change your positional judgment on where that risk is, and enable you to either validate your low risk assumption and therefore do less work there, move something from high risk to medium risk. If the system is saying it's all low, you flagged it as high, you might take a medium risk position, which means maybe your sample size is now different and more effective for confirming that is low risk from a system unbiased perspective. And then obviously the biggest thing is getting to that field work as early as possible. Understanding exactly what's there, knowing that you've got 100% of the data, that you can select from 100% of the data, you can make sure that the samples are valid and within scope, and you can understand what type of coverage you have very, very quickly and easily with a solution like this. So it's a bit of a 3-step process, and let's just recap, and I'll start looking at the questions as I recap so that I can answer some of these for you. In summary, the way that I would look at where you go from here, really it comes down to AI is in your wheelhouse. AICPA President Barry Melancon said at last year's Engage conference that it's coming. And he talked about it in terms of a 5-year roadmap, and then he sort of says under his breath, well, maybe it'll be 2 years. The reality is artificial intelligence is here. Many of your peer firms are either looking at it, have already done something about it, or are at stage 4, evolved with it. And they're taking this to a new degree of how to get your customers the best value possible. So, that whole idea of redefining reasonable assurance for you, making sure that you're doing risk-focused analysis and be able to drill down deep into any transaction and entry and really pull the right thing is some of those they would want to roll through. Being able to create an actual program to support you and to be side by side with you is, again, going to be really quite key. And then obviously, as you start thinking about where to go from here, there's a real product out there with customers that are making headway in either becoming in that evolution or have evolved to be AI-enabled firms. And we think that's really important. And finally, just as I get into the question and answer piece, and I'll read them and then answer them back in a second, is, there is a journey that we've laid out for you that can take minimal amounts of effort to get you started. Educational, driving you to really understand how this can be leveraged, and using our MindBridge Premier Success team to actually come out and work with you to make sure that you can get from you're at point 1 now because you've listened to this, all the way out to stage 3 complete, and your team's ready to be an AI-enabled firm for your audits in the 2020 busy season. So for questions, first question we'll ask. Thank you, Mitchell, for asking this. Can AI auditor analyze multiple currencies? Of course. I mean, the reality of data is you can strip out the currency and very quickly see what's going on in the data. You can have multiple engagements, multiple subsidiaries. You can look at data kind of however you would like to. It's not going to necessarily look at your FX conversion rates and whether you did it appropriately, but it will identify anything that looks a little bit suspicious, and you'll be able to sort of triage from there. Pranjal asks, what can you tell us about the applicability and allowance with the regulatory bodies? So this is a great one. The industry, the way information trickles from the likes of IAASB all the way down into our formal standards at the given regulatory bodies or oversight bodies in the given geographies, can be slower than some of us would like. The great news is that we have already been working with many of them, if not all of them. Just this past week, we had a great session over at ICAW, one of the membership bodies in the UK, and we brought together with them, we collaborated on this quite extensively, to bring together practitioners in the industry, technology firms like ourselves at MindBridge and others, and the standard setters to really have a healthy dialogue on where it fits. There's clearly an alignment to risk mitigation, enhanced judgment based on data and analytics. And in fact, AICPA, just to give you a local example for North Americans, AICPA actually wrote a whole guide around data and analytics. And we kind of take that and launch from there. We do all that, but do it even further by leveraging machine learning and artificial intelligence to support getting to good information and good insights to help you define how you're going to judge that given organization or entity that you're auditing. Becky asks us a little bit about IT people. Do we people or developers to configure MindBridge and help build tests for us? You know, one thing I was remiss to show you in this most recent demo, although you can kind of go online and see one of our other demos, is a concept we call Filter Builder. This is all designed for the individuals, and in fact, I will pop back to the web for a second. You'll notice that my results finished in all that time that we talked. So far, I'm not a developer. I am a finance person by training. I know a little bit more than I would like to about public accounting. Just kidding for all of you on the phone who just thought I was crazy there. But none of this was done from a programmer's mindset. I went and grabbed data. I reviewed how the AI within AI Auditor lined up my accounts and my account mapping. I validated that very quickly, and it gives me a picture. To go in and build my tests, I might say that I want to look at one that MindBridge is already preset. So maybe some of my journal entry filters. I want manual transactions near year end or material transactions near year end. Both of those, I'm going to say, yeah, that one looks just about right. And I'll go from some number of transactions, in this case, 2,000 transactions to 15 to review. So you can very quickly get to this with zero need for IT. It's literally sign up, you get your own tenant, your own instance that's highly secured, AICPA's SOC 2 Type 2 compliance, all your data is segregated from anybody else's data, and you can do just what I just did there. I can go grab all the transactions that happen at year end, and I can now select those and put those into my audit plan if I want to do 100% coverage on year end manual entries. Very quick, 1, 2, 3 steps, give it a description, assign it to a person, and off I go, right? Gonna go and work for me. Now Alfred's gonna get notified. He can actually go out early and ask the client for any information he's missing. So I think we're just about at time. One last question I'll sneak in right before the buzzer goes. What are the most important benefits of AI technology to our clients, and how do firms sell the value in this? Well, I'll give you a real life story. A company on the West Coast is one of our clients, fairly sizable. You know, they're in the top 300 in the US. They were doing an engagement last year's busy season, so 2018's busy season. And they took a bunch of transactions to the CFO of their client based on what they had seen. And the CFO was quite perplexed. They were very surprised in a positive way that these had been brought to them. Like, why did you pick these transactions to review? They had an answer for them. They were all very healthy at the end of the day, but it was actually a training issue on staff in the controllership at the bookkeeping level. So they were trying to run some payroll transactions, and they were adding them and then backing them out, and then adding them again and then backing them out. And that's obviously a suspicious flurry of activity. Now, if you just looked at ending period balance, it all looked fine. But when as you start going into, getting ready for your sampling process, you might do a haphazard, you might do, maybe something with a random number generator. But AI can actually create a very strong level of focus. Take these types of transactions based on this type of criteria. So following AICPA guidelines again, I want all the unusual amounts hitting or impacting revenue, any entry. We can give you that list. You can launch Intelligence Sampler here with the big purple button, and say, out of this, my professional practice guide tells me to do a sample size of 30, and it will go and do that. So how are you selling it to your clients? The biggest value is you now have a solution that builds upon it, from a faster way for you to do things, an easier way for you to describe to the client why something's been selected and what's interesting about it, right? Go back to your insights point of how do you provide value to them. It's providing them a level of insight. It's going to make you go faster. We've got clients that have taken their journal entry testing process from 100% time down to 10% of that time. So a 90% reduction in time spent on journal entry testing. We've got clients who have, just in the data shaping and modeling, where some people think it's a black hole, have gone from 40 hours of work on a big client down to 1 to 2 hours of work. Drastic reductions in efficiency in time on your side. To your client side, faster for them, more thorough, and delivering insights back, whether it be through that trending tab or through the risk view that we've looked at. So unfortunately, we are at time. I'm going to try to honor that. And if I did go over, I apologize to you on the phone that I took more than your hours of time. Really, really great questions from the field. Again, our viewpoint is you're all ready for this. The industry is ready for this. And all you need to do is get started. We've got a simple plan to get you there. You can take us up on this at any point in time. Just head to mindbridge.ai/jumpstart, and you'll be talking to one of my team about how we can get you AI enabled by 2020.